it is such a great joy for me to get to be with all of you today. As Sarah said, my name is Karyl Patredis, and I am the associate pastor over in the modern worship space at Grace Avenue. Now, I just have to take a moment to tell you all how much I love Kim Eifert, and I am so thrilled for you all that you get to have her as your lead pastor. She is one of the funniest and the kindest and the most thoughtful people that I have ever known. We went through our entire residency process together. We were ordained together in June, and there is no one else I would rather have been along on that ride with. So cheerio to you and to the delight that y'all have for Kim as your senior pastor. But today, as you know, she is on vacation, and so we're going to go on a wild scriptural ride together this morning. In the month of July, as you probably know, we've been in a sermon series called Off the Rails. And the text selections have been pastor's choice. And so, of course, I ran to the book of Judges because in my mind, there is no more bananas book of the Bible than Judges. And what we see in Judges is this sort of spirally descent into madness. And by the time we get to the last judge in the book, who I'm going to read about today, things are so far off the rails, you may have forgotten that there was even a track to begin with. So for context, remember with me that there were 12 total judges that sat over Israel. Some people count Abimelech as a judge and say there were 13, but for me, he doesn't fit the pattern. So I go with 12, starting with Othniel. And at first, things were going decent-ish. Remember that the judges were not kings. They weren't primarily lawmakers or courtroom judges like we think of today. They were more charismatic leaders whom God raised up for a specific moment to rescue Israel from oppression, call the people back to covenant faithfulness, and restore peace. So think of them maybe as a cross between a military defender and a spiritual reformer. The judges were needed because there was this cycle that the Israelites kept falling into. So they would forget God, Yahweh, our God, the true God, and they would worship other gods. Then they would become oppressed by a neighboring nation, and they would suffer under that oppression. And so the people would cry out to God, and God would raise up a judge to deliver the Israelites. And the judge would then do that, deliver them from a certain amount of time, and there would be peace. Then the judge would die, and the cycle would start all over again. So this is pretty crazy when you think about it, that we saw this happen not once, not twice, but 12 stinking times that people would forget the God of their deliverance, and God would have grace only for them to mess up again. And I said spirally descent earlier because the spiral literally goes in this downward pattern. So yes, the people were forgetting God. The judge would rise up and there would be peace. And with Othniel, there were 40 years of peace. And with Ehud, who succeeded Othniel, there were 80 years of peace. But by the time you get down to the later judges, the periods of peace and the time that it took for that cycle to repeat become much shorter. With Jephthah, for example, we only are down to 6 years of peace compared to that 80 that we had with Ehud. And then Abdon, only 8 years of peace. And by the time we get down to Samson, who we're going to read about today, the Philistine oppression continues, and there is no reason to believe that there was any peace at all in his time of judgment. So here we are. We're about to pick up somewhere near the very bottom of this nasty, overarching spiral I keep talking about of the story of Israel. And we'll meet a character whose journey paints a very troubling descent all on its own. The story of Samson begins in chapter 13, when an angel of the Lord comes to his mother and tells her that she is going to have a son who will be a Nazirite from birth. What this means is that he will be one who is completely dedicated to God from the day he is born. And there were rules for Nazirites. Standard rules were no wine or grapes, nothing from the grapevine, no cutting hair. A razor was never to go to a Nazirite's head, and then no contact with the dead. Even their close family and friends, they were not to have contact with. And so Samson is born to his parents, and now we're going to read the first part of his adult story, which sets off in chapter 14. Buckle up. This is a wild one. It says, once Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw a Philistine woman. Then he came up and he told his father and mother, I saw a Philistine woman at Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman among your kin or among our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, get her for me, because she pleases me. And his father and mother did not know that this was from the Lord, for he was seeking a pretext to act against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So like I said, it was one of these times where they were in oppression. So then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah. When he came to the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion roared at him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed on him, and he tore the lion apart, barehanded, as one might tear apart a kid. But he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson. After a while, he returned to marry her and turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and there was honey. He scraped it out with his hands and went on eating it as he went. When he came to his father and mother, he gave them some, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken from the honey from the carcass of the lion. His father went down to the woman, and Samson made a feast there as the young men were accustomed to do. When the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Samson said to them, let me now put a riddle to you. If you can explain it to me within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 festal garments. So they said to him, ask your riddle. Let us hear it. He said to them, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. But for 3 days, they could not explain the riddle. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's new wife, coax your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us? So Samson's wife wept before him, saying, you hate me. You do not really love me. You have asked a riddle of my people, but you have not explained it to me. He said to her, look, I have not told my father and mother. Why should I tell you? She wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted. And because she nagged him, on the 7th day he told her. Then she explained the riddle to her people. The men of the town said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And he said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed on him. He went down to Ashkelon. He killed 30 men of the town, took their spoil, and gave the festal garments to those who had explained the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. That's a wild story. Am I right? So if you're like me, you read this story and you are, at the very minimum, a bit confused, but probably a little bit disturbed too. Samson says of the Philistine woman, now get her for me because she pleases me. He says that to his parents, and he sounds like a spoiled child, not like a Nazirite man that is entirely committed to God. Further, he tears apart a lion, which, as you'll remember, his contact with the dead was against Nazirite rules. So we've got this spoiled, rule-breaking child man who gets married to a woman that he points out because he likes the way she looks, and then he poses a riddle to his 30 companions that you can think of maybe as modern-day groomsmen, and they can't figure it out. So they go to his wife to help them answer the question. She goes to Samson, and you hear her very dramatically say, "You hate me. You do not really love me." It says that she complained and nagged him the entire 7 days of their wedding feast. Can you imagine what a great, sweet start to a life together? And Samson says to her when she keeps on begging him, "Look, I've not told my father and mother. Why am I going to tell you?" Wow, another really sweetheart. But then the text tells us, after all of this time, he finally gave in and tells her the riddle. She tells her people, and then what was Samson left to do but go and kill 30 men in the village so that he can make good on the bet that he made? And then naturally, as if this story can't get any weirder, it ends with him just giving the wife that he wanted so much 3 paragraphs ago to his best man. And that's kind of where we end this chapter. What on earth is this story? It is truly one of the most off-the-rails tales that the Bible gives us. Now, I think actually the more familiar part of this story is found later on in chapter 16, where we read about Samson and Delilah, who was his second wife. Very similar to this first story that we've just read today, Samson once again tells Delilah a critical truth about the reason behind his great strength, which was his hair. She told the secret to her people, they shaved his head, and Samson ends up with his eyes gouged out by the Philistines. A life not gone according to plan, for sure. Now, as I said, the scripture selections for this series have been pastor's choice, which means out of all of the chill passages in the Bible, I decided to talk about this one. And I chose this one very specifically because in this story, Samson, as the final judge in the downward spiral, is meant to illustrate just how far off God's dreams for the people had strayed. And I think it is very easy for us to follow this same unfortunate pattern. Undoubtedly, there are times when our lives go off the rails through no fault of our own. A diagnosis comes. Someone decides to end a relationship with us, and we don't want that. We are laid off at our company because of the economy or because of structural changes, and those things are out of our control. Things like this are critically hard, and they are an important topic of discussion. But they are not where I want to focus this morning. I want to talk about the times in our lives that go off of the rails because of a slow drift. I'm focused on decisions that we make over months or years or decades, almost never all at once, that lead us off the rails 1 inch at a time. And that is why I appreciate the story of Judges so much. That's why I chose it. Throughout the entire book, there is a slow burn, a slip that occurs after the death of each judge. In Samson's life, he was born to be in close relationship and have a life totally committed to God. But he stepped off the path, one choice at a time. And what sticks out to me and bothers me so much about this story is that Samson had the chance to learn from what happened from his first wife and not repeat the exact same mistake with Delilah, but he didn't learn. The haunting last verse of the entire book of Judges, chapter 21, verse 25 says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes." All the people did what was right in their own eyes. For those that saw my sermon title today, I named it Pledge Allegiance to Your Hair, your team, your vibes. Now, yes, I admit that this is a knockoff of Taylor Swift's song, The Fate of Ophelia, but I liked this title because it is exactly what Samson does here. He pledged allegiance to his own strength found in his hair. He pledged allegiance to his tribe, his feelings, not God's. And we see where that landed him. I wish I could say that I have never found myself on a similar trajectory, but unfortunately, that isn't the case. About a year after my daughter Charlotte was born, I began having what I would have called at the time as completely unexplained panic attacks. At first, I was certain I had a heart condition. I went to urgent care at least twice, trying to understand why I couldn't get my heart rate down, why my body would get so locked up and I couldn't move. I refused to believe that there was any mental health components at play, because up until that point, I thought I had no basis in understanding anxiety or depression or anything else that I'd heard other people talk about. Surely this is physical, I thought, as I continued to deny my need to talk to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Nothing that unusual is happening to me. I'm for sure fine, I told myself. But there were warning signs. It turns out that things can build up. You can go off the rails 1 inch at a time. This was back when I was working at a corporate job in Dallas and commuting around an hour each way every day. Both of my kids were ultra young, and I was learning to be a full-time mom and a full-time employee in the midst of some major changes that were happening at my once comfortable workplace. There were other smaller personal things going on, but because there was not one major thing that I could identify, I didn't realize all the stuff my subconscious was juggling until I was really far gone. Like Samson, I had the opportunity after my oldest child, Preston, was born, and I began struggling with irrational thoughts, to have raised my hand then and admitted that something felt off, just like Samson had the chance to have said, hey, what happened with my first wife, maybe I won't repeat that again, but he didn't. I didn't. I just kept right on going down the path of look away, pretend it's all okay, say everything is fine. And before I knew it, my life was totally off the rails. I would go nights on end without sleeping a wink because my anxiety had gotten so bad that I believed that if I went to sleep, I would not wake up. I remember being in meetings at work and looking at everyone else in that room and wondering how they could breathe in a room that was so hot and terrifying. It wasn't until July 5th of 2019 that I hit my breaking point. And thanks to God's grace and the help of my family and friends and some great doctors, I was able to begin my journey back. But it took years to unravel all that I had pressed down, refused to feel, and denied. Luckily, I did not end up with my eyes gouged out, pushing 2 pillars to meet my demise, but I did suffer because I lost my spiritual footing, my ability to look for God in the mess, and I had been unable to listen. And so I wonder if some of you may be in that same place today. Is there something in your life right now that you are not dealing with? Perhaps you are spinning so fast that you're not caring for yourself or the people in your life who matter most. Maybe you are making decisions that you know are not good for yourself or for others, but instead of examining them, seeking help, or admitting to yourself that you need to change, you're just blindly spiraling down and down and down. I think the invitation that we find in the story of Samson and in the story of my descent into crippling anxiety is not to repeat it. Let's not be like the Israelites who forget the God who has gone with us all this time. Let's not be like the Israelites who decide to do what was right in their own eyes and not God's. The text teaches us that it is not going to end well for any of us if we follow this pattern. We must repledge our allegiance to our Creator, the one who made us with big dreams and plans to give us hope and a future. So if you're sitting here and the Holy Spirit is whispering your name and saying, hey, this is you, I think the next question we have to examine together is, how do we exercise the free will that God has given us to choose a better path? Mercifully for us, Jesus left us the map to get back on the rails. One thing that strikes me is that Jesus rarely seemed to live in a hurry. I feel like that is so hard for us to understand in our modern day, but it's clear when you think about it. Crowds constantly wanted something from Jesus. You have sick people interrupting him, and the Sadducees and Pharisees all over him all the time, trying to catch him on a technicality. His disciples were consistently confused by what he was trying to teach. And it's wild to me, because even knowing he only had 3 years of public ministry, Jesus never once seemed frantic. I know that even with great medicines and therapy and spiritual direction, I'm still frantic a lot of the time. And I don't think that's what God hopes for us. Somewhere along the way, we've started believing that faithfulness means doing more. Jesus seemed to believe faithfulness meant remaining connected to God the Father. Looking back now, I don't think my anxiety and panic disorder began in 2019. They probably began months, maybe even years before that. They began every time I ignored my exhaustion and told myself, you're fine, when I knew I wasn't. They likely layered on every time I believed I could carry more things alone or confused my productivity with faithfulness. Jesus modeled a life that is counter to what we're taught in culture today. Jesus slipped away to lonely places to pray. He took a nap on a boat and accepted invitations to dinner that were not planned out 6 months in advance. Zacchaeus, I'm coming over tonight. He noticed people everyone else hurried past. Did she just touch the hem of my robe? He spent time grieving and celebrating and intentionally got away from the crowds. He knew that a life anchored in God could withstand what a life driven only by hurry and self-reliance never could. Jesus stayed deeply connected to God, the Creator, when the inevitable discomfort and pain of the human experience rolled in. When I think about the broader story of the Israelites, Samson's more granular story, and my lived experience, here's what scares me most about the slow drift. We seem to slowly adapt. Like we adapt to less sleep, and we adapt to constant stress and overloading. Never stopping becomes normal. Being disconnected from God is just part of the dysfunction that we've come to understand as the status quo. Thinking about our text this morning, by Samson's day, Israel wasn't just oppressed anymore. They had entirely forgotten freedom was even possible. Are we like that? Jesus came to rescue people from oppression, yes, but also to awaken us to the possibility of a different way of living. Jesus doesn't simply forgive people. He teaches us to be human outside of a spiral that forgets the grace of God because we're so busy doing what is right in our own eyes. Jesus' pace invites us to a new allegiance, another kingdom, and another way to measure success? What if we carried our pain differently? Not shoved down deep, but open-handed before the grace of God? What if we believed that others in trusted community like we have here could hear our stories and hold them carefully so that we didn't have to carry our burdens alone? What if we loved like Jesus, unlimiting and non-judgmental and free? Imagine what that would do for us and for others in the middle of the moments that break us. Jesus invited us into a model of rest and another way to live. In God's kingdom, success isn't found in how much we produce or how strong we appear or how well we hold it all together, but in a life that remains rooted in the love and presence of God. In 2026, drowning in social media and an overabundance of information, we're pledging our allegiance to something every day. We're told we've got to have the high-powered career, or our image has got to be buttoned up, no sloppiness. We've got to be right, and you better fight it out in the comments section until you know you've won. You better be ultra-productive, or else you're a complete failure. At the end of the day, the question isn't whether we're pledging our allegiance. The question is to whom. Samson pledged his allegiance to doing what was right in his own eyes, while Jesus pledged allegiance to God's way. One path slowly led to blindness, and the other led to a life of resurrection. So as we wrap up today, I want to make sure that the invitation you hear this morning isn't that you need to try harder. I want to be clear that asking yourself if your life is in a slow drift doesn't mean you need to go home this afternoon and do 12 things to fix it. In fact, maybe today isn't the day to fix anything, but it may be the day to stop and notice and tell yourself the truth. 2, unlike Samson, reach out for help so that you don't make the same mistake again. And to listen to God, who is right in front of you, offering grace again and again, just like he did for the Israelites all those years ago. Maybe today is just about listening. The good news about God's unending, unrelenting love is that if the slow fade happened one decision at a time, then coming home can happen one decision at a time too. As it turns out, the rails are never as far away as you think they are, because every time we turn toward God, we discover something that might surprise us, which is that God has already turned toward us. The God who never gave up on Israel has not given up on you. The God who never stopped pursuing Samson has not stopped pursuing you. Grace has a way of finding us, even off the rails. Thanks be to God for that. Amen.